Good evening, everyone, and thank you for listening to the Futurati podcast, where we dive into how emerging technologies will impact the world and your bank account. I'm Trent Fowler, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, Thomas Fry. Thomas and I are futurists, keynote speakers, and consultants with decades of experience in analyzing trends and communicating new developments to audiences across the world. Reach out to us at futuratipodcast.com/contact-futurati if you'd like to hire us for consulting, to speak at your event, or to advertise on our podcast. So, Thomas, we just wrapped up a fascinating interview with Robert Hendershott, who is a finance professor and investor who is promulgating this philosophy he calls Ingenuism. So was there anything particularly surprising that leapt out to you about this?
No, he talks about how ingenuity is one of the primary things that separate humans from the other species on planet Earth here. And that's where most of the value gets created in our ingenuity. Him being part of Silicon Valley, that's the one thing that stood out in his mind as the real differentiator as to what really creates the kind of this $1 trillion value that's in a lot of the startup companies that are being created today. That I found that to be absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I really like the fact that the label for his philosophy, Ingenuism, he admits that it's not referring to anything particularly new, but it reorients our focus towards particular aspects of the way humans think and the way we come up with new ideas. That is very illuminating. So when he sent over the materials for us to prepare, he noted that two of the core tenets of Ingenuism are respect and trust. And I actually didn't get a chance to ask him about this in the interview. I made a note to ask him about it, but I didn't get around to it. Having talked to him now, it makes a lot more sense to me why those two in particular would be so important as opposed to something like intelligence or honesty. And it's because what he's focusing on is human connection. So his path into studying Ingenuism and arriving at this idea began when he noticed in 2018 that the speed with which companies are able to go from $500 million to $1 billion to $10 billion to $100 billion to $1 trillion had really become like they were getting to that level far more quickly than they had in the past. And part of the reason for that is because humanity is so much more interconnected than it has been at any other point in history. There's now so much more information. We're now talking to each other between the internet and telecommunications. There's all these channels for ideas to travel, for information to travel. And that allows companies like Google or Apple or Facebook or what have you, OpenAI now, to leverage all that information, all those interconnections in a way that produces a tremendous amount of value. So that was very illuminating. It reminded me a little bit of Matt Ridley's idea or his concept of ideas having sex, if you've ever heard of that phrase. That didn't come up either, but I was thinking about that as he was talking.
Yeah, even though he's been in academia all his life, he's not a fan. So he says that one of the downsides of academia is that if you fail in a course, you're a total failure. You're a loser, and we need to actually teach people how to fail more respectfully. In the business world, people are going to fail a lot, so they need to get used to it. So that.
Well, in the scientific world too, the philosophical world, like anytime you're treading new ground, you should expect to stumble more often than not. Especially if you don't have a map and you don't have a guide and you have no idea where you're going, you're just feeling around in the dark. Scraping your knees is probably the rule, not the exception.
And we need to learn how to take risks, and being branded a loser is not an easy way to take a risk.
No, that makes the opportunity cost pretty major. So I loved it. I've been a fan of Robert's for some time. I listened to his Ingenuous podcast. I think you should too. And this interview just couldn't have been more fun. So without further ado, here's episode 140 with Robert Hendershott. Tonight, we're joined by Robert Hendershott. Robert is a finance professor, hedge fund CIO, and evangelist for a philosophy he calls Ingenuism. Ingenuism comes from the thesis that human progress stems at its core from ingenuity, the unique human amalgamation of curiosity and ambition. Nurturing ingenuity is the most important thing that a culture can do. There is no ceiling on what a society that promotes connection, exploration, discovery, and learning can accomplish. If you enjoy this interview, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends. And don't forget to check out our website, futuratipodcast.com. Robert, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Trent.
Let's hear a little bit about your background, your interests, and what brought you working on the problems that you're working on today.
Well, I am originally an academic. I got my PhD in finance 30 years ago, and I've been a professor at Santa Clara University in the business school. So I landed in Silicon Valley and got interested in why Silicon Valley works the way it does and how it's been so effective at creating new technologies and new companies. I also did some research on banks, and that somehow turned into an investment strategy. And over time, I became more of an asset manager than an academic. So right now, I am on my way out as a finance professor. I still teach a couple courses. I'm doing an online course right now. But mostly what I do is I run a hedge fund, and I work on a newer project, which is really based on that work that I did as a professor, how magical things can happen through new technologies, through people applying their ingenuity, working together to make the world a better place.
So now that you're on your way out, you can actually say things that you really think out. So based on this past year with the banks and kind of the tumultuous last few months, how are you projecting the future for the financial institutions in this country?
Well, the financial institutions in this country have been evolving very, very slowly, while the services that they provide have been evolving pretty quickly. It got accelerated in the pandemic, but even before that, the way people were doing their banking had fundamentally been shifting. And so we have a banking sector that looks a lot like it did 100 years ago, and we have way too many banks, and we have way, way too many bank branches. So what needs to happen is for us to have fewer banks and a lot fewer bank branches and a lot better banking technology that makes it even easier than it is today to accomplish your banking goals without ever having to, go beyond your computer or your smartphone. But that has all gotten a little bit derailed by the Silicon Valley Bank failure, and I'd be happy to talk about that. But the gist of it is, right now, the regional banking sector is it's basically going through a sea change, where a bank like Silicon Valley Bank, which had a set of very attractive depositors that would leave lots of money at the bank and didn't care very much about the interest rate they were getting, no longer looks like it's viable because it's so easy. It's a few clicks of a mouse to take that money out. So what I see is the change in banking accelerating, but that doesn't mean it's going as fast as it should be going. What ideally we would have is a world where we got rid of 90% of the physical bank branches. That real estate got redeployed into something more productive. People were able to accomplish all of their banking without ever having to go into a branch, and they existed only for our grandparents. But that won't happen for another couple decades.
Okay. What do you think has driven the sclerotic quality of the American banking sector? I mean, do you buy the basic libertarian case that a lot of it is regulation and regulatory capture, or do you think there's something unique about finance that makes it prone to this? How do you think about that?
Well, there's definitely something unique to banking, at least the way it's developed historically. This could all change. We're finally in a world where you don't need those intermediaries to take people's deposits, to give them access to their money, to keep their money very safe, but at the same time, be using those savings to invest in the future productivity of businesses and the country. I mean, for most of history, banks played a key role in matching people who were saving money to people who wanted to borrow money. It's sort of the other extreme of venture capitalists, where you would never put the money you were saving for a down payment on a mortgage or something into a venture fund, because one, you couldn't get to it when you wanted it, and two, it might all go away. You put it into a bank, but then that creates all sorts of unique problems, because it's very hard to take money where the depositors want it to be very safe and readily available and invest it in future projects. But that's what at the core banking is supposed to do. Bankers existed because they knew the depositors better. They had relationships with depositors, and they knew the borrowers better. Today, most lending can be done as effectively or more effectively using statistical models, and depositors no longer value having a relationship beyond the convenience of having everything tied to your bank account. I mean, it's unique in the sense that it's very easy to switch your bank. It literally is just a few clicks of the mouse, at least in theory. But it's also something that people do very rarely because it's a hassle. I mean, you think about your business bank account. It's set up for payroll. It's set up to automatically pay some of your expenses, your rent, your credit card. Your personal bank account, it's paying your mortgage, it's paying your utility bills, it's paying, and all of that is set up on autopilot so that if you switch, it's actually a huge hassle. So it turns out that almost nobody switches their bank unless there's a big enough incentive. And then, like in Silicon Valley Bank, where there were legitimate fears about the bank's solvency and continued existence, and then once the reasons get large enough, go past the threshold where it's worth the hassle, then everybody leaves. And that is what's unique to banking, is there's always been two equilibria. There's the case where everyone's satisfied with how the bank's doing, has confidence in the bank is profitable, the bank is solvent, it continues just like that. And then if doubts arise, particularly when they're real, Silicon Valley Bank was insolvent on an economic basis, then you immediately switch, and we saw it literally happen over the course of 48 hours, from a bank that is considered one of the best banks in the country to gone.
Hello, this is Trent Fowler, co-host of the Futurati podcast. One of the most common pieces of marketing advice I've come across is to know your audience and give them what they want. One difficulty in podcasting is that it's actually pretty hard to do this. None of the major platforms give us any way to reach out to you, our listeners, to find out what you enjoy about the Futurati podcast and what you'd like to see done differently. So we've decided to record this commercial and ask you directly to reach out to us. Head over to futuratipodcast.com, go to the contact page, and drop us a line. Tell us about your favorite and least favorite episodes, what you'd like to see us cover in the future, and anything else you want us to know. We produce this show for you, and we want your advice so we can make it even better. Thank you.
And that is unique to the way banking is set up.
Now, you said the word intermediary, so we're contractually obligated to ask you about your position on blockchain technologies. That's if we had balloons and confetti, it would come down as soon as you say that. That's the word of the day. So, I mean, you're a finance guy, professor, you're an investor now. How do you think about just the panoply of different blockchain projects that are out there? Do you have one you like? Do you think it's mostly bullshit? A couple promising gems in there. Like, just lay that out for us.
So I guarantee it's mostly bullshit. But that's not a problem because that's how these things always start. I mean, if you look at Silicon Valley startups, most of them are bullshit. It's just very hard to tell which ones are bullshit early on. So I don't have one that I don't think there's anything right now you can look at and say, oh, this is how it's going to go. This is what's going to replace the existing financial system. And the potential is clearly there, but it's something that'll have to be discovered over time. And it's very challenging because first of all, you have very entrenched incumbents that include governments who have FBI agents that they can send to arrest you. And that has happened in, I believe it was New Hampshire. There's a Bitcoin project that got shut down under the guise of, and it's not totally illegitimate because a lot of the use for crypto is nefarious purposes. It's for money laundering or for buying things that have been deemed illegal. So when you're in that position where the incumbent is very well entrenched, both from a market standpoint, the dollar is incredibly convenient to use. Even, taking into account Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic Bank, it is still incredibly convenient to have a bank account. And the cryptocurrency, anything on the blockchain right now is not. And it has to do with network effects. It has to do with the fact that trust is something that we're sort of, I won't say evolutionarily, but certainly societally, we've been bred to believe it is necessary. So it's hard for people to wrap their brain around having a project that really does eliminate the need for a trusted intermediary. And then, of course, we have all of these, what were trusted intermediaries that have blown up and lost people's money. And that just reinforces the idea that blockchain can't replace the financial system. But it definitely could. This is something that we think is really exciting. The hurdles are high, and the first iterations of the technologies are probably not going to be it. I don't think Bitcoin is going to be a global currency, but something along those lines, something that eliminates the frictions of intermediaries, not just allows us to get out of the existing system, but actually improves on the existing system. That would be super exciting. And you're seeing a little bit of it in China, where you have these very large networks that have been built, and then it just becomes convenient for people to start using them to transact. And while that still tends to happen, and in China it'll probably forever happen with the central currency, there's no reason that you have to use a central currency. I mean, there's no reason that Apple Pay needs to use dollars when Apple has a far better reputation than the U.S. government, and has a user base that spans the globe, and is the perfect set of customers that could go outside the dollar. Now, Apple's got too much to lose if the FBI comes into their headquarters, so I don't think Apple's going to do it, but somebody could do it.
So when you have some countries like, let's say, Argentina, who is not known for having a very stable currency,
No.
And then having people that want to use Bitcoin and some alternative cryptocurrencies there, because they view that as being more stable than their national currency. And I think that could be true in a lot of countries around the world. How do you kind of think through the equilibrium that goes on in the minds of those the citizens of those countries?
Well, you're competing with the exact same thing, the U.S. dollar. It's just in those countries, the dollar comes in, $20 and $100 bills. It's very inconvenient, and it's very insecure. You don't have the ability to keep I'll call it a hard currency, even though you could argue exactly what a hard currency is. But you don't have the ability to keep that inside of the financial system. So it all ends up being in the underground economy. And it's still better to hold, dollars than to hold the local currency. But having a cryptocurrency that's widely accepted, that would be far better. And that is, in my opinion, the place where it's most likely to gain traction. The challenge is that those are the places that are the least integrated with the rest of the world's financial system. And so it doesn't naturally pull for the kind of critical mass that would be required for you to have some crypto that you could then take on your European vacation and use, or you could be using to buy groceries down the street.
Okay.
All right. So let's spend some time talking about Ingenuism. This is the idea through which I found you. It's what your podcast is called. It's what your Substack is called. Tell us a little bit about this idea, Ingenuism.
Well, Ingenuism it's not a new idea. It's the idea that human ingenuity is a source of basically all good things that are in society. And that the more opportunity that you have to both lever people's ingenuity for them to use it for their own purposes, but then to also connect and collaborate, the bigger the impact is of people's ideas. And so when I first started thinking about this, it was in the context of Silicon Valley, because I had been teaching for a long time, and I sort of had my shtick about here's what Silicon Valley does, here's why it works, and here's what you want to learn from this. And then in about 2018, we started to see just these massive increases in the value of some of the leading technology companies. And it was happening on a much bigger scale. This has always been the case that, you have a new technology that comes in, you have Google that comes in and completely transforms the way people interact with searching the internet, with finding things on the internet. And we go from, if you're old enough to remember Alta Vista or the early search engines, they were basically useless, but they were better than nothing. And then Google comes along and it's orders of magnitude better. And within 5 years, Google is $1 billion company. Well, in 2018, we were starting to see companies that within 5 months would become $1 billion company. And then Google was $1 billion company. And then 3 years later, it was a $25 billion company. And then 3 years after that, it was a $100 billion company. I mean, the growth and then of course, by 2018, it was a $1 trillion company. So the growth in the value that was being captured by these companies was just astonishing. And at the same time, there was more and more obvious that the value that was being created by the companies was, 10, 20, 50 times what was being captured. I mean, Google's a great example. If you think about Google, most of what we use from Google is free. And so the fact that Google can be worth $2 trillion and we're not even paying for what Google provides, it just blew my mind. And I was trying to think, why is this happening now? What is it that is true in 2018 that wasn't true in 2008 or 2012 or, 2008 was a weird year, so it's maybe not the best example. But the idea was there had to be something going on. And when we started playing around with the idea that connection was a key part of how much you could lever people's ideas, and this has always been true, where whether it was connection by letters that would take months to cross the globe, or by steamships that would take weeks to cross the ocean, or by airplanes that would take hours to cross the ocean, there was always a huge benefit to connection, because once an idea or an insight existed, it could spread, and once something was shown to work, it could be levered and repurposed in all sorts of different areas and different projects. But the advent of the internet, and in particular with effective search, we came to the conclusion that was the difference, that now you could take what people were doing, 8 billion people now, what people were doing, and aggregate it in a way that was greatly accelerating progress. And by progress, I don't just mean, we often talk about how valuable, say, Apple is as an indicator of progress, but I don't just mean financial progress. I mean the world being a better place for humanity and people being able to do bigger and better things. And this was really exciting to actually come to this conclusion. And we played around with it as an economic model, and it definitely works as an economic model. But more importantly, we started to see it everywhere we looked. And that's what I've always thought are my best ideas, where I can see them, whether I'm looking at what's happening with the leading tech companies, whether I'm looking at what the differences between North and South Korea, when I'm looking at why East Germany was like North Korea and now it's more like West Germany. All of it was just everywhere. And ever since, this has been what I'm most interested in.
So when you look at the exploding world of AI around us, how do you think that plays into the human ingenuity part of it? Is that going to be possible for AI to replicate that and or amplify it in some way?
I like the word amplify. Right now, I think AI would be better a term for augmented intelligence than artificial intelligence, because it's in conjunction with a human being. From an Ingenuism perspective, the chat GPT type of models, the chatbots, are incredibly interesting because they took what we thought was great search, something like Google, and they turned it into something else that is even more valuable. So, from an Ingenuism perspective, I would say that the early stages of AI are increasing connection dramatically. So you can be connected to a way of coding a particular project and incorporate it very quickly and easily into what you're trying to do. So somebody else's ideas, somebody else's insights being brought in to be applied to what you're working on. That's the essence of connection. Connection isn't just the internet. I mean, I can't say a lot about social media because I try and stay off of it because I find it to be the unuseful form of connection. Not the human part, that's super useful, but it's very easy to get distracted in what is essentially entertainment while missing the opportunity to actually see insights, to see valuable ideas that are out there that apply to what you're trying to accomplish. AI is not like that. It's not gonna, at least not yet. It's not gonna be feeding you, entertainment when you're really looking for information and insights. So in the short term, I think this is enormously powerful. If we judge by what's happened with the internet, we should all be extremely optimistic about what's going to happen in technology and basically in people's lives, the ability for people to accomplish what they want to accomplish and enjoy their lives over the next 10 to 15 years. If we get true artificial intelligence where there is artificial ingenuity, that would be a completely different ballgame, and it would be wildly exciting, except for the fact, a lot of people are talking about that leading to the end of humanity, which is not very exciting. But the more ingenuity, the better. And as long as being applied to productive uses, that would be great for everyone.
So I always think about human experiences like sometimes I have a toothache, or if I go out running, my legs get sore. I get sweaty. I have all of these physical things that happen to a human being. And then the relationships that we have, I care about this person. I don't care so much about that person. That's the values that we're placing on things around us. Those seem to be things that artificial intelligence will have great difficulty replicating. And that becomes, in my mind, some of the big differentiators between human creativity and AI creativity, things on that level. So that would also get into the realm of ingenuity as well. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I hadn't thought about that angle very much, but I do think that there are right now fundamental differences between how our minds work when we're really being creative and how large language models work all the time. I think that if I look at what I have, my experience with interacting with AI models, and that's purely as a consumer, they are very much like me when I'm driving where I know where I'm going. I get there, but I don't necessarily know exactly how I got there, and I couldn't have gotten anywhere else. So when just as an example, my daughter is into jokes, and so I got on a bar at this particular time, and I asked for jokes that were appropriate for a child. I said, family-friendly jokes. And it gave me a list of 5 jokes. And then I just got curious. And actually, a couple of them were good. The one that she liked best was, what did the ocean, I blew it, never mind.
Oh, no.
What did the ocean say to the beach? And it just didn't, it just waved. But I got curious. And so I asked, okay, give me 5 adult jokes. And Bard declined to do that. And so I asked for 5 jokes that were not appropriate for children. And Bard gave me 5, and 2 of them were the same jokes that were on the list that were appropriate for children. And that's my experience, is that there's no there's no deeper understanding of what's really going on. And Thomas, that to a large extent, how I would extrapolate to what you were talking about is everything you were talking about was that deeper experience that I believe, and I have no evidence for this, I just assert it, that is intricately linked to our ingenuity and our creativity and, what it really means to be human.
Are you enjoying this episode of the Futurati podcast? If so, please like it, give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and share it with your friends. By far, the best way to help us grow is to spread the word on social media, which will expose our content to more people and help us continue to bring you interviews with world-leading experts in AI, quantum computing, cryptocurrencies, and so much more. Thank you in advance.
What are some of the technologies today that excite you most from an Ingenuist perspective? We've touched on blockchain, AI. Are there any others? What else are you looking into that excites you?
So anything that the basics of Ingenuism are that what really matter are connection and your ability to explore, discover, and learn. And so there's a bunch of things that excite me, although none of them are ready for prime time. We've already talked about blockchain technologies and AI, or chatbot versions of AI. That is really exciting, and I think that in areas where it's less about creativity and more about pattern recognition, that these models are going to be extremely valuable. I mean, you hear about protein folding. I think definitely we're going to see significant advances in medical diagnostics, where we're trying to figure out what's wrong with people, not based on the population, but based on a very narrow subset of the population, but an $8 billion population. It's still a large group that mostly resembles what this person is currently experiencing, who they are and what they're experiencing. So anything that involves pattern recognition, I think, is going to be very exciting. But in terms of really making a difference for the long-term trajectory of humanity, there are a couple things that have to happen from an Ingenuism perspective. One is that people need to, what's the right way to put this? They need to undo the damage that's been done by our traditional schooling approach, and even better, replace that approach with something that fosters ingenuity in kids from the moment they start actually going to school. And I've been in the education business for a long time, and there is definitely value being created when students go to class, but the amount of value is perhaps 1/10 of the amount of time that's being put in. It's incredibly inefficient. It's archaic. I mean, we basically teach the same way that we did 500 years ago. And particularly for younger kids, it's completely inappropriate because we teach learning as a particular model where you learn what is already known and you prove that you know the things that are already known. And that is an important part of learning, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't do that, but it creates a mindset where you're not focused on learning, you're focused on proving that you know what you're supposed to know. And we see this all the time at every level, but it gets worse as the students get older. So in college, it's pervasive that they're focused on, it's a game. It's basically a game on how do I get the points that get me an A. And that's not true learning. And true learning involves actually expanding the body of knowledge that you have and that the world has. And to do that, you have to be willing to explore. You have to be willing to try things. You have to be willing to fail. We have a terrible relationship with failure. If you think about how what failure means in schools, it's 100% bad. It is the worst thing that could possibly happen is that you fail. Yeah. Versus how if you have a productive relationship with failure, failure is how you learn. And it's so obvious when you start looking at it, but if you look at the educational system, we've all basically been completely effed up by learning to play a game, trying to get the score rather than actually playing the game and treating failure like it's something that needs to be avoided rather than something that's inevitable part of learning. And some of the most, you learn more from failure than you do from success. That doesn't mean you want to fail, and you shouldn't try and avoid failure, but that's just the reality of it. And what we have, if we extrapolate from where the current AI models are today, what we have is an opportunity to actually set people up with an education system that is much more personalized, that treats failure like we should, an opportunity to learn, a point to evaluate on where you need to focus your effort going forward. That's something that is never going to happen, in my opinion, in our existing school system, our existing structure of public education. It would be very expensive. It would require extremely talented people to dedicate their lives to what is a relatively low status and low compensation career. But AI is going to be perfect for that, is figuring out the patterns that work for Trent, for Robert, for Thomas, and then applying them in a way that maximizes the learning in an environment where when you go down a dead end, it's not a failure, it's just discovery. And that's how it is. If you're exploring an area that's off of the map, you're going to run into some dead ends. And you don't celebrate that, but you also don't, what's the opposite of celebrate? You don't
mourn it.
You don't mourn it. Yeah, you just take that as part of the process. And for me, in the very long term, that's what I'm most excited about, is these technologies. Like if we transform the U.S. banking industry and get rid of all these branches, that'll be great, and it'll save, it'll create $1 trillion worth of value, but if we were to transform the educational system so that the next generation of people growing up are just naturally using their ingenuity, they're not haunted by failure, they're not afraid to try new things, that would change the trajectory of humankind in a way that's hard to wrap your brain around.
What advice do you have for training that facility into people? So my daughter turns 6 on Friday. I think there's still time for her. Like how would I go about doing something like that so she grows up with just sort of a natural bent towards experimentation, failure, iteration, and has a healthy relationship to all those things? Like how do I unscrew her schooling?
Well, it's going to be ongoing if she's going to a traditional school. There's nothing in the traditional school that is trying to accomplish this. So one thing is to look for a non-traditional school. Now, that's something that for your daughter is a real possibility, whether it's by augmenting it, what the experience at school. Because homeschool, I'm not an advocate for homeschool, even though I think in a lot of cases it's probably the best schooling. It also it misses out parts of life depending on what your neighborhood is like and what sort of activities your kids do. Because it's a thorny question whether kids should be going to school and hanging out with kids all day, even if they're not learning. My answer is probably yes. But if we want your daughter to turn 18 with a healthy relationship with failure, then and I'm going to give you some answers, Trent, but I'm not saying these are the answers, because this is something I'm grappling with right now. I mean, this is sort of the direction Ingenuism is going right now, because from a policy perspective, it's really interesting because it says there are certain things that we should be doing, but mostly there are certain things that we shouldn't be doing. We shouldn't be destroying connection. We shouldn't be limiting people's ingenuity. We shouldn't be setting up barriers to experimentation. But from a really making a difference with one person at a time, all of the same principles apply. You just have to start thinking about what are the practices. And this is where we are right now. One is that coming to grips with, moving it from the background to really making it explicit that failure is acceptable. And the only thing that isn't acceptable if you're actually trying to accomplish something is not trying, is not experimenting. So elevating experimentation above success. And then experimentation by its very nature, involves success and failure. And, your daughter, what's your daughter's name?
Genevieve,
learning that by not just example, people trot out Thomas Edison, but it doesn't really internalize for people, that learning it by her own experience. And then the second piece is coming to grips with, or creating a practice around, how you deal with what you don't know that you don't know in the world, because that's the essence of exploration, is you're going off the map. And most of us don't even think about the fact that we're in a box, and there's a lot of stuff outside the box that we don't see. And that requires an ongoing practice of, what are the things you're going to try, not just experimenting, doing things different ways, which is very important. If you were talking about getting to the gym, so, in your life, you're experimenting over time on what's the right way for Trent to stay in shape. What are the things that work for me? And that's all very important. That's how you're evolving what you're trying to accomplish. But then there's a whole nother realm of, what am I not even working on that I haven't even thought about, that's the equivalent of physical fitness. So, it might be spirituality. It might be a mental practice, or a spiritual practice that brings you, and I'm not talking about woo, I'm talking about that maybe brings you into a state of flow, or into the zone more often. And how would you actually have a set of practices that has you be more effective in your job, or in your writing, or whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish? And we don't spend a lot of time exploring the what do we don't know that we haven't thought about yet. And so creating a practice for Genevieve around that, like, what are you going to do this week that you're going to find something that you didn't even know existed, and learn something about it? And, my experience with 6-year-olds, and I've had 4 of them now, is that they don't have a lot of baggage. They're not, they know they don't know a lot of stuff, and they're not resistant to that. And, by the time they get to college, it's like, how does that help me get an internship? How does that help me get a good job? How does that help me get a girlfriend or a boyfriend? Like, they've got specific goals, and they know a lot about those goals and how they want to accomplish them. And the rest is outside of the blinders.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, let me test out an idea on you. I have it in my head that in the not too distant future, we're going to be using either smart glasses or smart contacts to actually record everything that we're seeing and everything that we're hearing all day long. And so we will have this personal cloud over here that's storing, that it's our digital twin of our brain that is recording all of our life experiences. And with a few sensors, we can get the taste, the smells, everything else as well. And then creating a good interface with that, so that we can tap into that. So my sense has been that for the past forever, that the people that do best in business are the ones that have the best memories. And people that don't have great memories, but they might be really creative, just don't do that well. So somebody that can actually not have to rely on their memory for every little thing can then free up a lot of intellectual space for entertaining other thoughts. Is that realistic to think in that way? And is that a realistic possibility?
Well, the short answer, which is almost always the right answer, is I don't know. And it's in the same ballpark of what we think is likely right over the horizon, which is something that would take care of you. You said remembering things for you, and in a sense, we already have those kind of tools. We have calendars. We have it pops up 10 minutes before the podcast is supposed to start. We have a lot of those individualized tools. What we don't have is a way to fully offload. So now we have to keep track of the calendar, and we have to keep track, there's a whole nother set. And so I think the first step would be having basically a virtual AI assistant that manages a lot of these things for you in the same way that you would. So it's not a complete copy of your brain, but it has all of your preferences and all of your habits and all of your priorities already embedded in it. And it's in communication with everybody else's. So it knows in advance if you're going to be 5 minutes late to this call, because it can see how your day is evolving, and it lets everybody know, or it carves 5 minutes out of the time between then and now so that you're on time. That is really the first step in a projecting ahead sense. That's which would apply the biggest bang for the buck in terms of really helping augment people's limited mental energy and have them focus on what is the most important to them. The idea that I've never thought about and that is kind of cool, but I fear it turns into Facebook and Instagram on steroids, is the recording of everything and then going back to enjoy it again. There are definitely days in my life that I would really like to be able to go back and live again, just because they were amazing, or maybe my memories are not quite perfect, and I would be like, what? It's like watching a cartoon that you watched as a kid and thinking, I enjoyed this. What's happening? But that could be, that could be incredibly valuable for people and enjoyable. But I don't know that it's going to forward progress.
Do you need a dynamic and knowledgeable speaker for an event? Thomas Fry and me, Trent Fowler, are both seasoned keynote speakers, able to converse on a wide array of topics to audiences of all sizes and skill levels. Go to the contact page at futuratiPodcast.com to book Thomas or myself today, and let us apply our years of experience in public speaking to make your event a smashing success.
Well, fantastic. I think we covered a lot of great ground here. I really appreciate it. And before we sign off, where should we send people who want to learn more about Ingenuism?
Ingenuism, Ingenuism. I should know how to spell this.
Ingenuism. I think Ingenuism. I think that's right. I'm looking at it. No, I've got it right here. Ingenuism. I've got my notes. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
.com. We put out a Substack and a podcast where we kick around these ideas. It's really funny. It's sort of an Ingenuism story to end on it. When I was in first grade, I grew up in Indiana, and my first grade class was part of an experiment over 2 years, first to second grade, where they taught us reading. There were some professors at Purdue University who had come up with this idea that kids would learn to read better if you taught them phonetically. So it was a program called ITA, and we had books that nothing was spelled the way it's spelled in English unless that happened to be the phonetic spelling. So everything was spelled phonetically. So it made learning to read very easy. And my experience was it made learning to read very easy, and I can read quickly, and I'm an avid reader, and I can't spell worth crap to this day. And they threw the program out after a few years because that was the result. You got one benefit and you got one cost, and you would never predicted that, or maybe you would have predicted, but you would have never known that without trying it. Now, do I think that people should be taught to read using ITA? No, because I think you can use phonetics in a more subtle way that doesn't screw up their spelling forever. Although, today with spell check, I guess it doesn't really matter.
And soon enough, all the text will be generated by algorithms anyway. So
exactly, and they'll spell perfectly.
And there won't be any reason for any of us to learn how to write. So thanks so much, Robert. It's been a blast.
Thanks, Trent. Thanks, Thomas.
This has been terrific. Thank you.